Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out to Startup Boston Week. My name is Ashley Johnson, and I'm one of the organizers for the event. On my screen, you'll currently see the sessions that are happening right now. Currently, you are logged in to watch Proof in the Pudding, Identifying and Measuring Product Metrics for Success. If you did hope to catch one of the other sessions, please click on the agenda at the very top of the screen and then click join for the other session that you would like to be in. While we wait for people to navigate around, just as a reminder, we absolutely love questions. So please use the Q&A tab on the right to submit any questions you may have during the session. This is why we created the conference, to get your questions. And we also have an awesome social media competition floating around. In short, you'll want to pay attention to what our speakers are saying and then post an awesome quote on social media from them using the hashtag SBW2021. You'll then be entered to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a Black-owned Boston business. All right, have fun. Turning over to Marley right now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'd actually maybe like to first start with having everyone in the panel introduce themselves. So Jeremy, why don't you go ahead first?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Jeremy Pillai. I am VP of Product and Design at Ollie Pets. Super excited to be here talking to you all.
And next, Elena.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Madrigal, the Director of Product Marketing at TrueMotion, which was recently acquired by CMT, Cambridge Mobile Telematics. We are a mobile SaaS platform that generates telematic data and driving behavior insights. So super pumped to be here. Hello, everyone.
And Ashley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley. I'm an analytics manager at Wayfair, currently on the merchandising team.
Great. Well, I'm very excited to have you all here for the panel today. And let's get started before we get too deep into narration. So I wanted to set the stage by just asking, as a leader, how do we define success in the early growth or beyond stages of a startup?
I would talk about growth stages because that's usually when product marketing gets ramped up and involved. And so it's at that moment when you have achieved product market fit, and then you want to accelerate growth. For doing that, what I like to do is to work in layers. I would say at the top layer, I focus on what are the business goals. Is it growing users, growing revenue, increasing profitability? Then I listen to what are the business strategies that are going to get us there. Is it about core product optimization, product diversification? Are we expanding to new verticals or to new regions? And then with that information is when I define a very quantifiable objective for a product launch. And usually it could be something around revenue or users or penetration in a market that is directly aligned with supporting those company goals. And then finally, I go into what are the tactics that are going to drive those strategies. So that's how I'm defining success. If I'm getting to that quantifiable objective, things are going well.
I think another one during growth stage that's interesting to look at, and really help you understand if you actually have product market fit, is the ratio of your LTV to CAC. So can you acquire customers at a cost that, will they stay long enough to sort of pay back what it costs to acquire them? And I think that's something, in early stage, you need to make sure is relatively balanced. And then as you grow, you need to make sure that can scale, where as you're trying to grow and pour more gasoline on the fire and add new channels, that ratio still stays strong. I think that's something that it's super important and people really pay attention to.
And Jeremy, if anyone listening is not familiar with LTV, would you mind explaining?
Sure. So the lifetime value of your customer. So let's say it costs $50 to acquire somebody through a channel. Do they stay long enough, or do they repeat enough where they're paying back more than that 50? And hopefully you're having a ratio that's 2x or 3x your cost of acquisition.
Great. And I know we were mostly talking about what happens when a startup is in a growth stage. How do you know that you've entered the growth stage, that you're no longer early stage? Or on the flip side, how do you know that you've left the growth stage and you're actually a more mature product?
when I kind of think of measuring that, I also think of the speed, like how fast are you growing? I think growth stage is all about how you're incrementally gaining more and more customers, let's say, over the course of time. But as that starts to slow, then the question is, okay, are you retaining all those new customers? So it's like as you enter growth, you then get stabilized. And I know, like, I even think of that kind of like new companies or like new teams. Like, I think some people might be familiar with like storming, norming, performing frameworks that is like, are you growing really fast? Then are you stabilizing? And then are you retaining those that are sticking around?
I would even add to it is that you are starting to demonstrate that product market fit. Therefore, you are looking into your next round of investment, and that's when you usually tend to, okay, now we're going to need a bigger boat, right? So we need a more team, more efforts, etc. So, but that's when you get all that team together into starting that hyper growth mode or growth mode at the very least.
Yeah, outside of just the metrics and your financials, like when your processes start to fall apart because now there's too many new people in the mix, or what used to be a good framework now feels like it doesn't have all like the robustness that it needs. Like that's a sure sign that you're about to grow out of where you're at.
Oh, that's actually a great one. I always say that what every time that I join a company, because it's starting this growth mode, I need to implement some change. And sometimes people are resistant to this change. And I'm constantly saying, hey guys, what got us here will not got us there. So it's that like this no longer works. And then we need to start adding some process or changing frameworks, as Jerry was saying. So that is a very clear indicator that something needs to change in order to transform into the next thing.
I totally agree with that. It's like as soon as you realize, okay, we have a lot of problems and we have a lot of people, like how do we get organized so that we can start scaling? And so like once you decide that you're entering that I need to scale this mindset, you're kind of like starting to exit that growth phase.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about things like process, frameworks, but also metrics. And I think one of the things that's always really important if you care about that is you need the metrics or the data and insights to actually lead to actionable changes. So how do you use metrics to inform decision-making at your organization or with your leadership?
Yeah, I think I kind of like, I say it usually always depends. So I think when people say decision, it's all about what kind of decision are you trying to make right now? Is this a no-go, go decision? Is this, I'm trying to optimize my space decision? Or is this, I actually don't know what I need to do, so I would like to try and experiment things out. So I think once you know the decision that you need to make right now, or like 2 months from now, or 6 months from now, it's all about understanding what story you're trying to tell. So I like to kind of think that your data story could be like a Mad Lib, where all of your metrics are those empty spaces. So thinking about the who's, the what, the whens, and the whys, and trying to figure out, okay, what's my funnel? It's like, am I trying to optimize the middle, the beginning, or the end? And how can I actually start tweaking some of these things to actually see if I'm influencing the parts of my experience? And I think a lot of us work in the digital space. So I'll use like a shopping, an e-commerce experience, what I know. It's like, am I actually getting people to the parts of the site that I want? And then for those that are getting there and not getting there, are they doing what I expect them to do? And I actually might add to this question, like, metrics are super important, obviously, but sometimes I think people can craft a really great narrative and make really great decisions when you actually have fewer metrics and lots of dimensions. Because I think once you actually can understand where it's working and where it's not working, you can really tailor your strategy to think long term and then monitor moving over time.
I agree with that a lot. I always think that if we report on everything will become noise. So making those sub-segments of it. Yeah, absolutely.
I spend a lot of time building roadmaps in my role. And I think when I'm trying to put together a roadmap, there's sort of three, back to your dimensions, Ashley, that we look at in any investment. And first is the value. So hopefully there's real data and some sort of a business case behind an idea where you can say like, okay, if we do this, it's going to change conversion rate to this, and we think that's worth X amount of dollars. And that's the first dimension. And then there's complexity, which a lot of times has to do with engineering effort in my world, and I'm sure that's the same for many of you, where Like, it's great that this value is going to come out, but how much is it going to cost in terms of development, either hours or opportunity costs to do something? And that's the second one. And then the third one is really around strategy, where, you know, sometimes certain ideas, even if they're valuable and somewhat low effort, they might not hit exactly where you're going as a brand or a business. So there's kind of this third dimension. And we've developed sort of a scoring system where there's a range of different value scores and a range of different complexity scores and a range of different strategy scores. And that helps us get to an overall priority score that isn't the be all end all, but it helps have a discussion about why one investment might be better for us than another one.
Great. And thank you for adding examples, Jeremy. I know we had a request on the chat for some more specific examples, so I think that should address that. And actually, speaking of the chat, I know people following along have, some of you have found the session chat. Please feel free to introduce yourselves. We'd also like to add a poll because, as Ashley said, we're not entirely sure what products people are working with. So I think our other Ashley will be able to publish that soon, and you'll be able to let us know. Are you working hardware, software? Are you working with a product that's more business to business, or are you working directly with consumers? So please feel free to answer the poll and add more details in the chat. But as you all fill that out, I want to actually have us talk a little bit more about our products and our experience as product managers. When you're thinking specifically about measuring success and impact with your product, how do you set KPIs and targets?
I personally prefer to focus on a few core metrics that, as Ashley was saying, help me make decisions and take action. And I prefer to avoid getting too excited about the vanity metrics, like registered users, downloads. I mean, that's interesting to know, but there's not a lot of decisions. Obviously, if you have a great product marketing manager or a great marketing team, you nail a great product and you nail the message. A newly launched and well-hyped website that will see a huge spike in traffic over the first weeks, which is great because it means that acquisition metrics, indicates that the product resonates with your target audience. But what you don't know if it live to its expectations. So that's where I like to look into leading indicators rather than lagging. So, for example, consider revenue. For example, that's a lagging success indicator, which represents short-term success. Very good, but it can take months for a decrease in user engagement, for example, to be reflected in a decrease in revenue. So, talking about KPIs, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach, but I like to focus on, in early days of a product launch, I like to focus on user experience and engagement a lot. It's far easier to bring more traffic than it is to create a happy customer. I'm very fan of a framework that is HEART. So H for happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. So tracking those usually kind of get help into maintaining that top revenue if that is the core metric that your core objective.
Yeah, and to echo Elena a bit, it's all about kind of like assessing like the primaries versus secondaries. And I love what you said about like what's close, like what is the engagement happening, because it is so much harder to make sure your experience is great so that they'll retain them. Because I think I've seen a lot of times in the past, like, oh, we got acquisition strategies. It's great. We doubled all of our new users, but those users were low quality. So then you're left with this position of, am I actually looking at the right thing? So it's like, were those customers that were acquired to our site doing what I expected or what I wanted them to do? So I think it's knowing like, what is the primary objective of the feature or the change or the product that I want? And then what would be the nice to haves? And I think what gets tricky is like, to your point, it's like, how do I know that like maybe changing the color on a page made my revenue go up? It's like so much happens between those two things. Like you always kind of want to keep that in the back burner, but knowing that that revenue will always be correlated to how engaged and how delighted customers are in the overall experience. So it's like just being able to tell again that full story. By you don't want to forget that that number exists, but knowing which ones are the focus of the change and the actions that you're taking right now.
That reminds me.
Exactly, because go ahead. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was going to say what Ashley was talking about reminds me of this idea of having balanced KPIs. I was working in an e-commerce business a while back where, we had this website experience and we were trying to convert possible at highest AOV as possible, right? As many people as possible at the highest and keep them happy so they can come back. And we struggled where early on, like the team was going after conversion rate, and we were definitely like having wins there. But a lot of the times you'd start to see the AOV suffer because we were only focused on getting people through the funnel and we weren't thinking of mix. And then, we improved that. So we said, instead of conversion rate or instead of just AOV, we'll do something like, gross profit per session, which is, sort of a combination of conversion rate, but also AOV. But then we were, sometimes adding too much friction in the experience because we weren't thinking about retention or was it going to be a good experience to come back to. So then we balanced that revenue or gross profit per visitor metric with what I would call an effort score. So, folks who were on the site and then surveyed after, like, how easy was it to get through the process? And it turned out that the balance of those two different things was a much better iteration on, what we should go after than the first one on conversion. And then the second one that was a kind of combination of conversion and AOV. It sort of took this third iteration to really balance it out.
And Jeremy, if anyone is not familiar with AOV, do you mind explaining?
Sure, just average order value. So conversion rate is like how many people who come to the site make it to an order or whatever the goal state is, and average order value is how many people do that at, a higher dollar amount. So, usually it's better to have an AOV of $10 than $5, right?
And I'm sometimes biased. I like AOQ a lot because I'm like, maybe you're not buying the most expensive, luxurious, high margin items we have, but you're buying a lot. So that does sometimes indicate maybe your AOV is low, but that quantity, like, can't beat it.
I like that.
Even cross selling. So you are buying more than one product in one session. So that also it's basket value actually in that point.
And I think one thing that's really coming clear here is, even though the question was phrased as, how do you set metrics about your products? A lot of it is really about understanding your audience and your customers and what their needs are, which is something that I think is always really good to keep in mind.
Yeah, and also kind of realizing you probably have more than like one type. I think typically when like new ideas come up, it's like, this is the person that I'm trying to service. But in reality, they're all different flavors of that type of person. So I think it's also good to keep in mind, like, you're probably going to have to segment that group deeper and deeper. And that's where the dimensions come in really handy.
Yeah, that's right. But that's where also comes the task success that I was mentioning before. How easy it is for users to perform the action that we want them to perform, and are they actually going through it? Can we understand that? Are they frustrated? Maybe at what point do they stop and they just give up because it's too complicated? How much time are they taking? Can we benchmark into? We expect that it's going to take that time to action. Obviously, this can be biased because you may start doing something, then you just go to the bathroom and then come back or go for a snack. But getting kind of like, what is that time on action? What is the actual path, the optimal path also for a completed action? That gets super, super interesting.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm like having flashbacks to a moment where one of my analysts, and it's about knowing your experience really well, where one change and what the ripple effects of those changes would be. She noticed that the one page that we landed from an SEO point was not opening in new tabs when you engaged with it. So what people would do is they would get to our site, and then when they were done, they would close out and go back to Google. When we had a search bar on the site, they could close out and go back and maintain the experience internally, but they weren't. So like being able to know, hey, 80% of our pages open in tabs except for these other remainders was like a really insightful thing. It's like your feature wasn't working, not because of anything inherently wrong with the idea, but there were these extraneous circumstances. And so it's like knowing the experience really well is always helpful to figure out, is the metric actually aligned with the experience too?
Yeah, I would add to that, talking with customers and trying to understand their behavior, not just looking at dashboards or metrics, they're just having a human interaction with customers. And sometimes realizing in my past, I remember a product that customers wanted, but we were positioning it in the wrong way. So we were totally disappointing people when they were arriving to the page. And actually, you are selling me a chocolate cake, but when I arrive here, this is an apple pie. This is not what I was expecting. So I'm just going away. And we were not figuring it out. What is it that is not working? And then by just having that conversation with customers, it's like, you make the connection there and say, maybe for these type of customers, or in this type of region, or in this specific region, this product that we call chocolate cake, it's actually apple pie. So we need to just change and position it around it.
I saw in the chat, somebody asked about any tools. I love the idea of talking to customers. That's something that we try to do as well. Another good one is, you take your Google Analytics or Mixpanel or whatever you're using for data, and you understand what the funnel looks like, and then you use a tool like Full Story or Mouseflow. There's a lot of these different ones out there where you can actually watch users' session and see where they click and where they go on the page, and combining the data with that visual of how people are using the site for me has been really insightful at times, where just looking at the data, I kind of scratch my head. And then when I watch, 20 people go through that same flow and I'm actually seeing what they're doing, sometimes the puzzle pieces, start to come together.
I totally agree with both of you, where it's like the data is super quantitative. And sometimes I joke with my team, like, this is your book smarts, but the qualitative data is going to tell you why. So the quantitative will tell you like how much, when, like how often. We can measure things, but to really validate your hypotheses and get to the why, the customer voice is always so valuable. So I kind of think of it as the street smart. It's like something you can't really measure in traditional senses, but always, again, like inspiration starts sparking when you actually see someone using it in ways that you hadn't, because you're just so close to the product itself.
I want to very quickly go back to the Q&A as well. There's a question here from Becky asking for me to repeat again what HEART stands for. So here it is. So it is happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. There you go.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I would also just like to add a pitch for doing user interviews and actual engagement directly with users. It's not the same quantitative methodology, but you actually can get a lot of insights from just talking to 5 or 6 people in your audience and actually just seeing them interact with the tool or your mock-ups. You can learn a lot from that. So I also want to quickly publish the results of our poll. I don't know if I made it clear. You can select multiple because obviously multiple can apply, but it's a good thing that we are having an audience that's doing a lot of software work, because we definitely have our examples from that sphere. And actually there's a nice mix of B2B and B2C products. So I really think that everything we've discussed so far is actually relevant to all those, to both those channels. But I wanted to quickly go ahead and share that with everyone. So I also wanted to take a step back a little bit from talking specifically about metrics and products and our users, and really talking more about our organizations. What has worked and what has been some challenges when you've been building a culture of data-driven decision-making at your companies?
I can start with a couple.
Go ahead.
So I guess challenges, a couple are, in smaller companies, sometimes it's hard to actually get the data. Like, the bigger the company is, the more chances that you have an analytics team or a finance team that can help out in areas, and you have more dashboards kicking around, and it's just easier to get your fingers on that, where sometimes in smaller startups, unless you're writing SQL or something like that, it can be difficult. So that's been one challenge. I'd say another one is when you're at a business and you are really data driven and there's lots of data around, whenever a really new innovative idea comes up and you're trying to figure out if it's something that you should pursue as an organization, it's really hard for that innovation to stack up against other ideas that like are very related to the core business, and you can easily quantify what the impact might be. And I think sometimes, you know, innovation needs kind of a thumb on the scale where you can't just look at the data, but you have to kind of build a little bit with conviction and have a leap of faith. And I think that's data-driven organizations are so powerful for, you know, how they can use those insights to drive value, but sometimes can struggle with like true net new innovation.
Yeah, to what Jeremy said, I would add a couple more. Sometimes what I've seen in my experience is obsessing with the wrong metrics and wanting to rack up big numbers very quickly. And one of the things that I love to do is do a closed launch first and test it with a controlled audience, fix those things there. It doesn't overwhelm your customer success people. That doesn't overwhelm the people, the support people, etc. And start slowly and then ramp it up. And the other one, which is very, very common, and I've been part of it, is being too emotionally attached to certain features. So sometimes you are completely convinced that, oh my God, this is going to fly. People are going to be so excited about this. Or things like, meh, I'm not sure. And sometimes you are basing that on opinions, your opinion or somebody else's opinions. So when you measure which features are being used by users and how much, and sometimes you find surprises, right? So especially the features you thought users will use or the most or the least. So by being very non-emotional attached to this, it can help you prioritize your product backlog and then base decisions on this data and not on opinions. So the first time that you demonstrate, hey, let's start fighting, let's start giving opinions, here's the data, prove me wrong with more data. And then that removes all type of emotional attachment to it and starts to be much, much better.
You are not your user.
Yeah,
exactly.
I would even add to that too. It's the expectations of how self-service some of the data points are. Because I think once you get into that part, the challenges then end up being a little bit more like personal. It's like, yes, okay, now I have officially detached my feelings from the feature. I'm going to look at data, and then who's going to help me get it? Because I think with the challenges of growing like a data-driven decision-making culture is access, really. It's like if I am typically a designer, like who's going to help me get this data? Or if I'm waiting in a queue for analytics, like I'm a business. It's like I just can't wait 2 months for me to make a decision because like I'm waiting in a queue to get data. So it's like, and then I think some people I've seen get a little frustrated where being an analyst wasn't part of my job description or I don't want it to be. So how do I actually like grow in that space, and how do you actually evolve the data-driven culture if the expectation hadn't been set early on that this is something that is materially essential to your job description?
I'd also like to invite our audience to enter and chat any of the challenges that they've encountered. I might have a chance to get back to that before the end. We do hope to get questions. Taking another bit of a shift, returning back to the product and launch. Elena, I loved your mention about having a closed launch. We can really look at metrics. Just want to take the question a little bit broader. Just in general, when you're launching a product, what metrics do you prefer to track? And how is that different from when you're first building the product?
During the build process, I'm not sure if other folks are doing this, but like looking at the velocity of the team in a software environment is something that we pay attention to a lot because, you want to be efficient, but it also like over time getting really predictable about when you can deliver features and having really strong estimation, I think helps you plan out how big your launch can be. And then I guess it depends on, for me, like what stage the product's in. Like, obviously a lot of folks in the software world are doing MVPs. So when you're doing an MVP, there might be a learning agenda along with it where maybe retention's not your biggest thing because the product's not fully featured yet, but you really need to prove that there's engagement, because if there isn't engagement, then it doesn't matter if there's retention because nobody's ever going to use it. So I think it shifts around a bit depending on what stage it's in. But satisfaction is always key, because in the first iteration of a product, you're going to assume that you're going to get feedback and make it better for the next one. So capturing any feedback about what's working, what's not is critical.
Yeah, and I think to even
getting the validation of your MVP, right?
Right.
And again, as I said, if it's a closed beta, you are not overwhelming customer support. I feel it's better. I mean, having glitches and having mistakes is okay, but not responding to unhappy customers in a timely manner is definitely not good at all. Sorry, Ashley, I cut you off.
Oh no, I was gonna just echo both of you basically again, where I think it's like with the feedback and knowing your customers, I also think of it as like knowing the questions you're asking can be really, really important, because the funnel can get so long sometimes depending on the industry you're in. So I'm thinking from e-commerce, like the questions typically are, do I have this product? Are the customers seeing this product? Are they adding it to cart? Are they purchasing it? And then all the way to like, are they returning it, leaving a negative review, what have you? So it's like in each of the feedback funnels, it's like, where does it make sense for me to receive this feedback? And how can I actually do something up the funnel to prevent it before this maybe negative thing happens? Or how do I actually enhance all of these positive things that I'm hearing to make it even easier to do? And so that's kind of something I think of with the MVPs and like designing the product to get it to launch, is like, what is the fastest way we can get people to do what we need? And is my funnel really long, really short? And how can I actually fix something that I know they'll be dissatisfied with at the end earlier on through like education and communication?
And one thing to point out is, if we are focusing on what we're going to be learning from through these experiments, sometimes experiments are meant to fail. And sometimes what we've learned is that there's a feature or product that needs to be retired or replaced with something new. We're not only doing this to validate that we made the right decision, that we made the right MVP. Sometimes we learn that we need to pivot, or that we need to do something else.
I know. I feel like the number of times I ask engineers, is this behind a toggle? Can we turn this off whenever we want? Just in case. Like, we are testing. We think it's good, but we really don't know the ramifications here.
Yeah. Looks like we have a question. I think I'll actually come to that when we get to more of the Q&A section, and just actually ask, to what extent you all focus on your targets versus the metrics and targets of your competitors.
I personally don't obsess much about my competitors' metrics, but what I definitely dig very deep is in the users' review to find the gaps and areas of improvement for my own product. I love to see what they love or hate about my competitors, and also what type of language they use. Are they using a different language than what I've been hearing from my own customers? But I don't get too much obsessed into, oh, they are getting more downloads than I am getting, or, oh, they are, I don't know. Of course, yes, but I don't want to be too worried about that, and trying to get an action out of it, something that I can act on it, rather than just be desperate because they are getting a bigger pie, a bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah, that resonates with me, Elena. I don't know who said it, but famously somebody said, competitor aware, customer obsessed, and I think that's definitely a good way to think about it. I think I look at competitive metrics more as a benchmark. Like,
yes.
Let's say you have a subscription business, and in a subscription business, a certain amount of subscribers cancel. If you can understand in your cancel flow what a typical save rate might be if you present a user with an offer, and in the industry what the benchmarks are, like, it doesn't mean that you have to obsess over that, but if everybody's in the 10% range and your goal for your business case was 40% saves, like, it might signal to you like, wow, I wonder if we're being too optimistic about what might happen here. So sometimes it's just helpful to understand the range of what you're seeing in the market. So when you're goal setting, it gives you a sort of like another data point on what to look at.
And returning a little bit to some of the nuts and bolts of things, I know we've had a bit of a question about this before, but really just taking it back, what are the different tools that you find have been helpful to track success metrics, but also what are the different types of people and the human resources side of things that have helped you with this?
Yeah, I was gonna make a little joke where it's like, I think the most important tool is your brain and your peers, where it's like and great collaboration is what kind of like, again, like pivots you forward in the right direction to actually be able to make sure you're tracking things successfully. I think it's a lot of our work in like, I think the e-commerce or software, like digital space is very collaborative. So I think like some of the tools I found useful is trying to figure out what you need for different circumstances. So I think, are you monitoring something? So I think like, do you have a Tableau software, a Looker software? Do you have Data Studio? And how easily do you want your stakeholders or the entire company as a whole to be able to double click in and discover things themselves? So like, even like, I think Adobe Analytics is something I've used in the past where it's, you have like the basics to monitor. And then I think the question is, well, is success actually getting alerted when something goes wrong? Is it really important for you to actually be setting goals and like making sure you're achieving those goals or just beating your forecast? So I think there's a lot of ways, I think, with companies that are able to invest in data science or like forecasting teams, I think they're the ones that are really able to kind of push the envelope a little bit deeper in that regard to say like, is what is actually happening different than what I expected it to be? Because I think a lot of times people see, oh, it's going up and to the right, good for me. But actually, is that natural? Is that natural momentum? And so it's like, are you actually creating and changing your space to actually improve your product beyond what it was initially capable of? And so it's like, and then I think that also gets into the philosophical question is, if you look at your data and you use that to predict things, sometimes if you're doing what you've always done, you'll be what you've always been. But if you're actually setting aspirational targets, like, again, like making sure you have the right tools and reporting and alerting in place to see if you're straying from that a little bit.
I agree with Ashley. A lot of the tools that you described in those circumstances are huge. And if you have those tools and you're at a business of that size where you can invest there, like it's just really dramatic, like the impact that you can have. I've also been in really small teams and some startups where unfortunately, like not a lot of that data infrastructure is in place. And one like kind of hack that always worked for me, which was kind of embarrassing, but I'll share it, is like, I can't write SQL, but I can run it. So like getting a bunch of queries from, developers, or if you have an analytics team that you can then like learn how to just do basic modifications on, even if it's just date range or whatever, and throw that into Excel and make a pivot table out of the data. Like that got me by for years, before we had more sophisticated analytics and really smart people on the team to help do that for real.
Yeah, and I think also even in some of the smaller companies that I've been on where the analytics organization for the whole company was less than like 5 people, I see them lean into a lot of like homegrown tools. So you'll have the SQL and then maybe actually just rely 100% on the free Python, Matplotlib, Seaborn packages where you can develop your own procedures and just email things to people. Because I think you brought this up earlier, Jeremy, where smaller companies just like have a lot of data, but maybe aren't managing in a way that's most efficient because it costs money to have servers to have and store all of this data. So if you have to like run a query on your own and everyone's doing that, that's strain on that server. So it's like, how can I make it so everyone has access to this data, but they all don't have to run the query? So you end up getting like pretty scrappy and saying like, what can I run while people are sleeping and get an email to them in their inbox in the morning? So it's like, I think the tools have totally changed in the last 10 years in analytics. Like, I think when I started, everyone was like, know your VLOOKUPs. And now like, here we are with like, do you know how to do this in Python? So it all evolves so quickly.
For me as a product marketeer, where my strength lies within storytelling and creating that positioning, etc., and being able to tell a story with data, but not being able to actually pull that data on my own. So my best tool and my best friend, I don't want to call tools them, but it's the analyst. So analysts are my best friends in any company, totally. I mean, I adore them because I can come to them with like, okay, this is my hypothesis, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm seeing in the market. Do we see something like that here? So ask questions, and this is what I'm trying to get to. So arm as much as possible the analyst with that storytelling into this is what this is where I'm trying to get into. And then letting them do their magic, whether it is with Tableau or their own SQL or whatever, and then come back, okay, this is what I'm saying. So it could be this, or that. And then I go investigate with that. So that partnership with analysts, oh my God, that's the best.
And I think you're handling it the perfect way, because I think there's a lot of different types of stakeholders. And I've seen the stakeholders that go to their analysts and say, I need add to cart right now. And you ask them and you're like, well, why? Like, what are you trying to do? Like, how can I help? Like, I know where all the data is. But to have the attitude where it's like, I'm coming to you with a hypothesis. This is the, like, again, like the Mad Lib, it's like, this is the plot of my narrative and the story that I want to tell. What data can you infuse in it to make it strong? It's like kind of like you're making a defense in a legal brief. That's basically like, this is all of the reasons why you should listen to me. So it's like, yeah, I think that's a perfect attitude to have when working with your analytics partners is go to that, come to them with your problem, come to them with your ideas and your hypotheses, and they will find you the best data they have.
Yeah, because one of the things that I have found many times is like, well, you are asking for this, but you actually don't need that. What you really need to answer that question is this other thing. So by providing them with a brief and context, basically, it's usually helpful. So that's why I really like them.
Yeah, it's like even with the add to cart rate example, like I've gone in these situations where it's like actually what you want is like a 7-day add to cart to conversion rate, because you're actually trying to figure out like if the cart has an issue. So it's like, to me, like you can't really tell that from the number you presented me, but collectively, again, like your best tool is your peers and the conversations that you have by being problem focused is like how you can create the best strategies.
I think one more thing to add is that, you know, these collaborations don't only need the information about what your goals are or what the problems that you're trying to solve, but also knowing what the audience is. Because I know the last examples we were talking about, which were much more about how do we make decisions tactically about our roadmap or about our product. But sometimes this is also helpful if we're bringing it up to leadership to, you know, to ask for more investment in a specific product, or if we, you know, realize that we have a new area of opportunity we can get to. And then I think a lot of the times the audience then might require a different type of package of the data and analytics that we're getting. Maybe you just have one slide you get to put in a quarterly presentation or something like that.
Yeah, and our decisions like, yes, we are going to do this, but this is what we are not going to do. Mm-hmm. We could be doing it, but we are making an informed decision not to do it. And here's the data.
I think we're going to actually transition a little bit into some of the Q&A. I know it's been great that we've been able to address a lot of these along the way, but I want to start with Allison's question. So Allison's current problem is that she's facing an emerging, as an emerging UX professional, she doesn't have enough proof, quote unquote, in her case studies. She finds that employers are hiring for junior user experience people and are asking for heavy numbers about conversion rates and et cetera. She'd like some advice regarding this because she feels like she's in a bit of a rock and a hard place.
So I don't know if I fully understand the question, but if it's, you know, you're trying to build like your portfolio and you know, when you're looking at that next opportunity in your career, folks are saying like, okay, it seems like you can design well based on your portfolio, but did it perform well? And sometimes you don't have all that. You know, I would say a couple things. One, I would be making sure you're talking to your PMs about like anything that you design, like how did it perform? So like, you know, always trying to understand it, not just for your next job, but for the next iteration anyway. And then another one is like, even if you don't remember the exact data points, if something you designed was tested and then rolled out, you know, that's also like a good story to tell. If you can't get the exact numbers, like, hey, you know, they asked me to design a feature that solved problem X, and, you know, we tested it and it was rolled out nationally within a couple months, and, you know, users loved it. Like, I think that proof is there even without the exact figures.
Yeah, and I also feel for the sentiment that you have that's like you're in between this rock and a hard place, because it's something that's, I think UX too is like can be so subjective. So it's like, how do you actually tie it back to the end success of that product? And so I kind of also think of it as, well, what numbers do you have? So it's like, how many people did you like try this out on? How many people expressed a positive sentiment? Like, are you actually able in the future to kind of build up this reputation to send like an NPS survey out, like a net promoter score, to try and just figure out, would people start recommending the experience you've designed to other people? Because I think maybe you can't tie it back to conversion rate per se, but I think if you think of it as feeding the full customer experience, so to Elena's heart model, the engagement aspect and the happy aspect, like that's kind of where like just a survey, if you can get some responses, would be like 90% of people would recommend my experience to their friends.
I think the other thing I would add is that you can also have data points about the proof of the impact, not necessarily on the customers, but what your work did on the business and the team. So, you know, as a result of this, your product team was able to make XYZ numbers of decisions or type of decisions or validate their own hypotheses. Because that also adds value to the company. I think we would all agree that we get a lot of value from the data analysts we work with, the experienced designers, with our engineers, pretty much everyone we collaborate with.
Totally. And even if I think if some of your UX is like in an A/B test, I'm sure that there's some analysts that might have data for you. I think sometimes I think of it as like a flower, where like usually product is the thing in the middle, and then all of the other orgs are usually like the petals. So I sometimes like if analytics is talking to product and product's talking to UX, it's always nice to have like a little buddy within across your petals. So you can try and understand what exactly is the value that maybe a test you didn't know the results were ended up landing.
Yeah, one thing
I would even
go ahead, Elena.
I would even add to that. What are the learnings from those case studies? Even if you don't have numbers, exact numbers, even if it's something that failed, that's totally fine, because as far as you learn something from it, it doesn't matter that it failed. But yeah, the lessons learned of each case study, that can bring a lot of power as well, I think.
One other thing I'll say, if you do have access to data, but maybe what you designed didn't move overall conversion rate, you know, a lot of mature businesses, they know to look at like sort of the micro conversions in an overall funnel, but some smaller businesses aren't that sophisticated yet. So they just say, hey, we tried something and did this metric move? But I think like using the conversion rate example, like if you were designing something for the homepage that was intended to get people into that next onboarding step, like even if overall conversion didn't change, did the thing that you designed help people get to that next step? And really thinking about the successes and the types of things that you can control with what you were designing or what you were trying to put together.
I love that, Jeremy. Yep.
Yeah. And I'd like to invite the audience to keep submitting their Q&A questions. I think you can keep doing it in the chat. We'd also be happy to have you come on video. I know you have some time. But I guess in the meanwhile, I guess a question I'd like to just ask the panel is, what advice do they have people who are getting started in this, whether they are new to product or whichever role or function that they have in the organization?
Yeah, I can maybe speak to like maybe people who are trying to break into the analytics space. So I sometimes see people coming from like engineering, wanting to get more involved in the storytelling, or people even from analytics, like switching to like product, for example. And I think what's important is really focus on understanding the data and being willing to get into the weeds. Because I think sometimes a lot of the story is easy to tell, but I think your ability to understand where to look in the data is always important. So it's like, I think one of the interview questions I always ask is, if you got a table in a database and you know nothing about this table, what was the first thing you would do? And I think all of the strong analysts is like, oh, I would count star. I would count all the rows. I would count the unique rows. I would just try and see if there's like any metadata surrounding the columns. And it's like, to have that discoverability about one table usually means they'll be really thorough about some of the other like data stories that they'll tell. So they won't quit on one metric, or they won't just look at one dimension and be done. But I think knowing that they are willing to like understand data fully is like, I think a really good sign that someone's like really ready to get into the data analytics space.
I would say for product managers, like, you know, there's you've got to start to lean into some kind of differentiator, like when you're new to a role, that's your way to add value. And people tend to come into product from a bunch of different disciplines. And, my first product role came out of a customer service role, believe it or not. And so I didn't know as much about working with engineering or as much about analytics, but I knew a lot about the customer. So I really leaned into that part of what I knew while I was learning the analytics side. And I would say, like, wherever your differentiator is or whatever you spike on, kind of like lean into that when you're early in the role, but while you're learning the piece that you think is like the next part of the puzzle to really round out what you have to offer.
From a product marketing perspective, I would say that data and analytics information it's the sprinkles on top for a really good story. You can tell them an amazing story, but it's without proof points. Really, it's like fluff sometimes. But when you bring the before and after, the data, this is the lift, this is what you're getting, this is how I'm helping, and based with data and numbers, that storytelling becomes beautiful and also trustworthy.
Oh yeah, totally. I love like cutting all the fluff out and adding some data in, but I'm the analyst in this conversation, where I think sometimes I'll see a percent and I'm like, oh, you said this was like 15%. What's your denominator? What are your units? And then I'm like, your story's starting to fall apart. You used a lot of like creative words that are like really compelling, but is that 15% for 100 people or 100,000 people? Because that's still not clear in your story. So are you missing that chapter? So maybe I'm a little too critical.
No, that's why I love my analyst. To keep me real.
Yeah.
And I know some of that advice is relevant to people who aren't just entering in or starting this journey, but what advice do you have for people who have been in this for a while?
Never stop learning. I think in analytics, it's like everything you're doing is so cumulative. And I think you end up working with people who have a wide variety of interest in data, trust in data. And I think you still see people who rely on Excel versus like to query it on their own, and just like constantly learning how to communicate the best to make sure that your data is understood by the person that you're telling it. And again, learning all these new techniques. Again, like I think now that there's so many new tools out there, it's which can actually be the best to solve your problem. So like my only tip for everyone in the analytics space is keep your learner hat on and constantly keep learning, because get a Medium subscription and subscribe to things and get that algorithm sending you emails with really good articles and go from there.
Yeah, my answer, I guess, would be similar to Ashley's in the learning front, but maybe a little bit different where, I've always talked to product managers and said, like, be careful how long you work on the same product. And that doesn't mean you need to jump from business to business every year or something like that. But, usually there's this curve where at first you're learning for like 3 to 6 months, then you really start to understand it and you can have an impact. And there's some point, and I don't know exactly when it is, but after a certain amount of time, like, you're not learning anymore, and you've probably like infused all the goodness that you have in that product, and it's time for somebody else to look at that product. And I think, the more products that you can work on, the more, you can have these analogous examples where you remember something you did on one that's applicable to the next. And I think that's really powerful in your career.
Yeah, that's super right. And that's why one of the things that I love to do when I join a new job is to, with fresh eyes, look at everything, ask a lot of questions, test everything, because those fresh eyes will go away pretty soon. And then I will get used to the faults or the tricks and things like that. And I will feel like, yeah, this is natural. Well, it's not. So those fresh eyes, constantly, that's not constantly, but every time that you start something new and write it down and collect everything and ask a lot of questions, that's super, super important.
So I'd like to ask just a quick, almost a rapid fire round of an example of one metric you've looked at lately and what you did with it.
I can go first.
Yes.
I'm like, this is going to be super long though, so I don't know what rapid fire suits. But lately, like my team and I are looking at imagery on websites. So our hope is to try and understand, like, I think my team's probably sick of me saying this, but who cares? Like, who cares about this image? Who cares? Like, where's the data? Show me the data. Tell me why I should care. So right now we've been looking at engagements, add to carts, and coverage to try and understand, okay, for this image, if 2 people engage with it, is someone adding to cart more or less, to try and figure out what are those images that are correlated with actually making a difference in the ability to make a decision. So that's kind of like one of the fun analytics we've been doing lately on my side.
Something my team and I have been looking at is how much. So we have a product where we're selling fresh human grade dog food, and users come in and they fill out this whole quiz about their pup, and that informs the types of recipes and how many calories they get and things like that. And we're trying to understand, a lot of product people come in. Boarding the benches, you're going to convert people and get a lot of people through, but we're starting to really try to understand if we can get more interesting information in onboarding, does that either make more people committed to convert, or does it help us make the experience better that improves retention longer term? So we've got a series of experiments that are kind of messing in that realm, and we're learning some really interesting things about engagement and retention later.
In my case, it's not about my metrics, it's about my customers' metrics, as in trying to build up a good ROI calculator to demonstrate value. I work a lot with insurance companies. They are very risk averse, they are very slow moving. So you need to prove that your solution is going to save them this amount of money or this amount of time, which at the end gets translated into a dollar amount, and compare that to the cost of your solution. It's actually, it's a no-brainer. So we're working a lot into trying to nail down those metrics from them, which definitely they are not willing to share openly. So we kind of at least we think that this is right. We put that in front of customers and we see if they nod or if they are saying, oh, no, that is super far away. And with that, at least they get them thinking. So that's a different angle to that data point.
Great. And I know we're in the last couple of minutes here, so I just want to give a chance for each of our panelists to share anything they might not have had a chance to share already, or some nugget that they've learned in this conversation.
I will share that Ollie Pets is hiring across all tech, product, design, analytics roles. I'm like half kidding, but it's super exciting mission, and I'm sure there's a lot of talent on this call. So hit me up on LinkedIn if there's ever an interest.
Anything else anyone wants to share? Or any other last questions from the audience? All right. Well, I just wanted to sort of share that I really appreciated having all of the panelists join in on this session today, and to all of you who've come and attended this talk, because I know it's the end of a long day. We're after 5 o'clock of not just a day of sessions, but really most of a whole week of sessions in what might be the longest year and a half that a lot of us have had. So I really appreciate everyone who's made the time to come today to engage with us in the chat, in the poll, in the Q&A, and really just being here as part of your presence. It looks like some people are already connecting on LinkedIn. I know personally, happy to continue connecting with anyone afterwards. I think one theme has really been the value of collaboration and learning from each other. And so I think it's great that everyone took the chance to take time out of their day to do this, but would also love to see that continue.
Thank you so much, Startup Boston, for having me.
Yes, thank you, Marley. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Startup Boston.
Thank you, everyone, for a great session. We have one more session slot coming up. So if you want to check it out, click the agenda at the top, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone.